Identities of mutually intelligible languages, Croatian and Serbian. On YouTube we can find several attractive videos in English in which Croatian and Serbian are called by a common name, Serbo-Croatian, or are considered the same language. In these videos, it all comes down to a superficial argument that is accurate. This argument is that speakers of the Croatian language and the Serbian language can communicate with their standard languages. By getting acquainted with the content of this video, you will communicate easier with Serbs and Croats, and you will understand Southeast Europe easier. In this video we will explain how throughout history the Croatian language and Serbian language have come to the point that speakers of both languages can understand each other. We will present arguments from which it follows that it is not the same language. We can initially say that the Croatian and Serbian languages do not have their common Shakespeare, or in other words their common literary corpora formed during their separate developments. Clear indicator of Croatian cultural linguistic continuity is evident in the case of literary canon, as well as in expert editions of various authors. In the case of American English, it is impossible to even imagine American literature without English, and particularly British English influences. Herman Melville's novel Moby Dick is strongly influenced by the author's reading of Shakespeare. Also, William Faulkner's opus exhibits strong influences of Shakespeare, as well as British authors Keats, Joseph Conrad and James Joyce. In the same vein, Croatian literature from Romanticism to postmodernism is unimaginable without Croatian language heritage from the Renaissance to Baroque and Classicism, lexically, stylistically, phraseologically, the indicator of language and cultural continuity, and something completely absent in Serbian language literature. The 19th-century Croatian poet, philologist and politician Ivan Mažuranić had supplemented and written two missing chapters from the Baroque master Ivan Gundulić's poem Osman. Miroslav Krleža's 20th-century masterpiece Ballads of Petrica Karampu is based, among other sources, on the Croatian lexicographer Belostanec's 18th-century dictionary. Voluminous and linguistically brilliant and inventive novel Murin, authored by Croatian poet, novelist and critic Luka Paljatak, depicting the life of the greatest Croatian Renaissance writer Marin Držić from Ragusa, directly incorporates Držić's Renaissance idioms and phraseology in the work published in the 21st century. Croatian philologists have, as we can see on the screen, within Croatian, formerly Yugoslav Academy of Sciences and Arts, begun in the 1870s to issue critical editions of medieval, Renaissance, Baroque and Classicist authors writing in all Croatian dialects, in the special series named Old Croatian Authors, which contain texts from the 1400s to the early 1800s. Needless to say, there was not a similar endeavor among Serbs, except in a few marginal cases of Serbian literary historians explicitly trying to appropriate Croatian, and especially Ragusan Renaissance and Baroque literary heritage. It is absurd to even think that culturally Eastern Orthodox nation like Serbs could possess, in their language canon, eminently Western literature periods like Renaissance and Baroque. Marin Držić's drama was performed, for the first time in Serbia, by Croatian theatre from the northern Serbian province of Vojvodina, only in 1946. Summarily, Croatian literature and culture in general, from Romanticism to postmodernism, have absorbed earlier, medieval, Renaissance, Baroque and Classicist Croatian language heritage thematically, as well as in lexicon, phraseology, higher syntax and stylistics, while in the case of Serbian language literature there is no language and cultural continuity with these periods, only farcical attempts of cultural appropriation. Serbs translate their literature from the 13th until the 17th century, and from the 18th century, to modern Serbian language. Croats exceptionally apply this practice in case when text is hard to understand, and in Serbia this is the rule. So in the Serbian case, Serbian public is not familiar how the Serbian language looked like during 5 centuries. We can see on this picture this translated books to modern Serbian language.
This problem concerning the Croatian language and Serbian language is not harmless. Due to the wrong assumption that these two different languages are the same language, and on the wrong assumption that Croats and Serbs are the same people with different names, a controversial Yugoslav ideology emerged. It was the idea of the Austro-Hungarian Croats with the support of the Catholic Church and even, sometimes, the Montenegrins. Then there had happened intensification of tensions and eruption of violence in the first Yugoslavia, which was created in the 1918, then in the Second World War, and during the disintegration of Yugoslavia in the Croatian Homeland War in the 90s. This Croatian Yugoslav ideology should be distinguished from the Greater Serbia ideology, which has originated in the 19th century. In both Yugoslavias, the Croatian language and Serbian language issue caused permanent tensions, and this situation remained even when Serbia and Croatia became independent states. The Greater Serbia ideology, which is based on the assumption that these two languages are the same language, and, according to this paralinguistic criterion, Greater Serbia ideology and politics wants to conquer Croatian and Bosniak territories. During the last war of the 1990s, Serbs were destroying the Croatian cultural heritage they claimed was Serbian, following the principle that one of the Croatian dialects, namely Shtokavian, was basically Serbian, so that Croats who spoke that dialect were Serbs and the area where they lived was ethnically Serbian area and should be under Serbian rule. Among Serbs, this idea was represented by Vuk Karadžić in the 19th century, on the principle that if all Serbs speak Shtokavian, then all speakers who speak Shtokavian are Serbs, and the entire Shtokavian dialect is the Serbian language ethnic area. It would be similar to say if Danish is a Germanic language, then all Germanic languages are essentially Danish. On the basis of this idea in the 21st century, a slightly adjusted idea is represented by Serbian linguist Slobodan Remetic, who states that Croatian language and Serbian language are linguistically one language, and by that he means Serbian, while all others, meaning Croatian, Bosnian and eventually Montenegrin, are political languages. Remetic has conveniently forgotten that modern Croatian language possesses completely understandable and typologically structurally almost the same texts from the late 15th century, while Serbian language does not have anything similar before the 19th century. If we analyze his thesis, the inevitable conclusion is that a child is older than a great-grandfather.
Comparing the case with Croatian and Serbian language, we will also compare this case with American English and British English, as well as with Hindi and Urdu. We will use these 5 criteria for analysis. With these criteria, we will analyze whether American English and British English are the same language, as well as whether Hindi and Urdu are the same language. Frames with 3 different colors mean that language pairs are compared. The first 2 pairs are Croatian and Serbian, the second 2 pairs are American with British English, and the third 2 pairs are Hindi and Urdu. In the video we will show the historical development of the Croatian language and the historical development of the Serbian language. Polycentric standard languages such as English, French, German, Spanish and so on meet 5 criteria. First, the speakers understand each other. Second, language has the same name throughout history used by the authors in that language. Third, the language is based on the same written corpus. Fourth, language has the same cultural communication community throughout history, and the awareness of speakers that they speak the same national language, and abbreviated, the same cultural identity community. Fifth, they are essentially standardized at the same place and in the same time. In New Linguistic Essays, Croatian linguist Radoslav Kartičić gave 3 criteria for distinguishing close languages: genetic, genealogical, typological, structural, and value-based. But since the value-based criterion was difficult to explain, it has been criticized. It would be more precise to say culturally identitarian or ethnically cultural for the value-based criterion. On this figure we can see the dialectal distribution of Croatian dialects before Ottoman occupation of Croatian and Bosnian territory west of the river Drina. Croatian is in the 14th to 15th centuries period a set of dialects of Caricalvian, this purple area on the north, Charkavian, that dark blue area near the Adriatic Sea, while Western Shtokavian is this lighter blue area, or those derived from Western Shtokavian, which is in this picture represented as the green area.
Serbian linguist Pavljević gave a similar dialectal distribution in which we can see Eastern Shtokavian and Western Shtokavian. Zones 3 and 4 belong to the Western Shtokavian dialect, Zones 5 and 6 to the Eastern Shtokavian, and, although he uses different terminology, in Jevic's classification, the segment 7 is Proto-Tolak.
In this figure red area is East Shtokavian, and brown area is Tolak dialect, which are Serbian dialects. Ottoman occupation or conquest disturbed this dialectal distribution. For the purpose of this video we can give the following short and approximate picture of dialectal distribution, following the interplay and stabilization in the period from the early 16th century to the late 18th century, when most of the contemporary dialects were, generally, structurally stabilized while retaining their central pre-Ottoman dialectal characteristics, although, of course, this is a never-ending continuous process if we consider all isoglosses and structural indicators. Shtokavian is divided into 2 groups, Old Shtokavian and New or Neo-Shtokavian, which, in the case of ethnically mixed dialects, reflect their Western or Eastern origin. These are modern Shtokavian dialects. One should add that in a few cases there are marginal speakers of different ethnicities in some of these dialects, but this does not alter the general picture. In the first group we have Old Shtokavian group, which comprises Slavonian, which is mostly Yekavian, and belongs to Croats, Old Western Shtokavian, which is Yekavian, it belongs to Bosniaks and Croatians, Old Shtokavian, which is Akavian, it belongs to Serbs, Old Eastern Shtokavian, which is Yekavian, it belongs to Montenegrins, Serbs and Bosniaks. The second group is Neo-Shtokavian, Shtokavian Yekavian, belongs to Croats and Bosniaks, New Shtokavian Akavian, belongs to Serbs, and New Shtokavian, which is Yekavian, and it belongs to Serbs, Montenegrins, Croats and Bosniaks. Or, in the case where Croatian Ragusan and the Bay of Kotor dialects are lumped together with Serbian and Montenegrin Neo-Shtokavian of Eastern origin, this area on the figure. In the case of Dubrovnik, there are 2 things to be mentioned. In poetry, the language of Dubrovnik Renaissance literature was mostly a Shtokavian, Charkavian mixture. Then, from the 17th century onwards, especially in prose, this regional Croatian dialect mostly abandoned its Charkavian features in the written corpus, becoming more clearly a Western Shtokavian Yekavian dialect. Another Croatian Shtokavian Yekavian dialect, that belonged to Franciscan authors in central and eastern Bosnia and preserved in numerous religious works from the early 17th to the late 18th centuries, and spoken also by Bosnian Muslims, had never interfered with Charkavian, although some structural features have a rather strong similarity with Charkavian, which led many philologists to the wrong conclusion that islands of Charkavian had been distributed even to the Drina River region. In the chapter Language as a Code and Language as a Social Reality of that book, on pages 47 and 48, For Western Germanic languages, we have a different number of languages if different criteria are applied. 2 languages if we look at them genetically, High and Low German, 4 languages if we count them typologically structurally, Dutch, High and Low German, Yiddish, and 3 languages, Dutch, German and Yiddish, if we classify them according to the cultural identitarian criterion.
In this video, accepting Kartachic's languages classification criteria, we further enumerate and analyze aspects of Kartachic's value-based, or, better, cultural identitarian criterion. We will show how various segments describing and structuring the cultural identitarian criterion can be presented to the wider audience. Mutual intelligibility criterion is not that relevant, since this can change due to interventions in standard languages. Also, mutual intelligibility cannot be projected to the history for the Croatian and Serbian case, since Serbian literature before the 19th century cannot be understood neither with Croatian and neither with Serbian standard languages knowledge, while Croatian literature can be understood. So this criterion is colored red.
Croatian and Serbian are basically mutually intelligible languages, such as Hindi and Urdu. Therefore, we can put positive mark according to this criterion. The number or percentage of differences between modern standard of Croatian language and modern standard of Serbian language is not something decisive, nor important. It is language individuality, cultural identity, continuity and historicity that matter. To put it poetically, the genius of a language, and while modern linguists generally don't occupy themselves with such matters, there have been a few quantitative analyses in past few decades, mostly at the graduate level of study and based on modern language corpora. Having in mind that percentages of anything should be considered in the context, for instance, genetically, the difference between chimpanzees and modern humans, their genomes is 1.2%, chimpanzees and humans being 98.8% genetically identical. A graduate study performed in 2013 by methods of quantitative mathematical linguistics gives results as follows. The corpus sample has 787,278 occurrences and shows a difference of 16%, while the sample of texts has 3,437 occurrences and shows a difference of 12%. Given this, but also the fact that differences at syntax level, accentual differences and phraseology are not included in the analysis, it should be assumed that the differences are probably around 20%. Based on this analysis, slightly more than 50% of the differences were discovered at the morphological level, and the following are the most numerous lexical ones with 30%. Differences are the smallest at phonological, with about 8% and word formation level with about 6%. Syntactic and spelling differences have not been investigated.
In addition, most Slavic languages are mutually intelligible to a rather high degree, as shown in the following video, which plays with the notion of inter-Slavic language so that obsessive insistence on the sole intelligibility is not some central, decisive element. You can test if you have some Slavic friends if they understand this language on this video. Important persons for this inter-Slavic language are Wojciech Homorunka and Jan van Steenbergen.
American English and British English as variants of the English language are mutually intelligible, so let's put that positive mark here. There has never been a common language culture and heritage for the Croatian and Serbian language. The parallel with Hindi and Urdu refers to the dialectal basis of the standard languages. In the case of the Indo-Pakistani languages it was the Karibali dialect. In the case of Croatian, Bosnian and Serbian, it was the Neoshtokavian dialect. But it is a dialectal basis, not all standard language with its variety of functional styles, grammar, vocabulary and so on. In addition, only Croatian has Čarkavian, Shtokavian and Karakavian as a system of dialects. Serbian and Bosnian do not have these dialects. There is a mutual intelligibility and core grammar and vocabulary, only there was never a single language, Serbo-Croatian or Croato-Serbian, that allegedly once existed or disintegrated. When you have language corpora of written texts dating back 1,000 years, and they unmistakably belong to either the Croatian or Serbian language, or in the case of Bosnian, 500 years, then you have never had a single language. Languages can be seen as dialect systems and as standard languages, with the older name literary language, if they have a written culture. Bosnian, Montenegrin, Croatian and Serbian languages are typologically and structurally different as dialectal systems, but to a lesser extent this refers to the dialectal basis of standard languages. A distinction must be made between the system of dialects and speech, and the national standard language. This can be seen here for the Croatian language. Croatian, Montenegrin, Serbian and Bosnian are typologically and structurally completely different as systems, whether one looks at which dialects and speeches they include. As standard languages they are typologically structurally also different, but to a lesser extent, since their dialectal basis is Neo-Shtokavian, and therefore closeness in grammatical description follows. However, this description is not identical for these languages either, since Croatian, especially in the fields of orthography or orthoepy, morphology, word formation, vocabulary, phraseology, syntax and stylistics, grew out of the Western Neo-Shtokavian dialects by interweaving with Čarkavian and Karakavian, and it within the Western civilization circle profiled its own separate grammatical description, which was partly disturbed by Croatian neo-grammarians or Croatian Vukovians, but their grammatical normative solutions were only partially accepted, and that on the line of historical development of Croatian, while the Serbian language is based on Eastern Neo-Shtokavian dialects, with a minor influence of Torlak in the standard language. The description of grammatical differences was popular at the time of clearer differentiation of Croatian and Serbian, as well as the struggle for international recognition of the language, for example in Gubirina and Krstić's book Differences Between Croatian and Serbian Literary Language from 1940, Dalibor Brozović Grammatical Aspects of the Croatian Language from 1996. And from the Greater Serbian point of view in the book Pieper's book South Slavic Languages, Grammatical Structures and Functions from 2009, but over time this topic has disappeared or is disappearing from the grammaticology of those languages.
The Croatian language, as a system of dialects, consists of Karakavian, Čerkavian and Western Shtokavian dialects, Serbian Eastern Shtokavian and Torlak, Bosnian mostly Western Shtokavian and somewhat Eastern Shtokavian. Croatian language standardization occurred within the Western cultural zone and was influenced by the Latin language grammaticology, the first Croatian grammar from 1604 having been created under the strong influence of Latin, and the Five Languages Dictionary of the Croatian language from 1595 with Latin entries in the first column. We can see the Croatian language system in this picture, with the indicated Latin language influence.
Those who try to apply the sociolinguistic theory of pluricentric or polycentric languages to these languages fail because not all of the above 5 criteria are met. First of all, we have already seen that Serbian and Croatian speakers understand each other, so there is a positive mark, as well as for English speakers, and the same goes for Hindi and Urdu speakers. Second, for a language to be polycentric you must have the same name. Historically, Croatian was called mainly Croatian, Illyrian and Slovene, plus regional names such as Slavonian, Ragusan, Bosnian, Dalmatian. In contrast, the Serbian language was called Serbian, Slavic, Slavano-Serbian and Serbo-Slovenian. In the Serbian case, there are several examples of the language being called Illyrian, and Church Slavonic form Illyriceski, but these were several works from the late 17th and early 18th centuries influenced by the cultural policy of the Vienna offices, and soon disappeared as an imposed name from Serbian language practice. This is obviously not the case with variants of English, German, French. Let's quote the prominent historian of the Serbian language Aleksandar Mladenović. The name Serbian language, which would terminologically refer to either the vernacular or the literary language of Serbs, appears in the Serbian heritage, judging by our current vocabulary material, quite late, only from the end of the 17th century. Only one older isolated confirmation of that name from 1374 was found, which means Serbian church and literary language. To the extent that the ancestors of today's Serbs needed to name their literary language, they used the name Slavic in the spirit of the Church Slavonic tradition. According to this criterion, two variants of the English language will receive a positive mark because there is a common name English, and for Croatian and Serbian we will put a negative mark for this criterion because, as we have seen, there is no common name for Croatian and Serbian. Hindi and Urdu originated in India, some parts of which have historically been associated with the name Hindustan. For Urdu and Hindi, the British administration promoted the name Hindustani, but it never came to life among the native speakers as the dominant name for the literary language, nor was it part of their cultural historical tradition. From the 13th to the 18th century, the popular names Hindustani, Hindi, Hindavi, were used in everyday speech, but there is no book or larger text in which the language would be called, systematically, Hindustani or any common name for Muslim and Hindu writers, whichever script they wrote in and whatever dictionary and grammatical system they used. As in the Croatian and Serbian cases, as a literary and written language in the pre-standard period, the language based on the Karibali dialect did not have a common name for either the Muslim or the Hindu ethnic cultural community. The only important difference is that in the vernacular the name Hindavi and Hindustani was used, and sometimes Karibali, while in the case of Croatian and Serbian this was not the case either, because Shtokavian, as a concept, appeared only in the mid-19th century and after. So, as a self-reference for language in the written works of the authors themselves, Muslims and Hindus, there is no common umbrella concept. Therefore, a question mark can be placed for the common term Hindi and Urdu. For centuries, there has been no common name for the Croatian language and Serbian language, nor is there a common name both Serbs and Croats would be willing to accept. So here we put a negative mark because there is no common name for it. In speech and text, during the standardization of Croatian and Serbian in the 19th century, these languages were also called traditional pre-national and national names, Illyrian, Croatian, Serbian, and two named names, Croatian or Serbian, Serbo-Croatian, Croato-Serbian, which originates from the ideologues of early Slavic studies that was accepted by various European philologies, German, Italian, British, Russian, French, and insisted on them despite the fact that this too named name was not accepted in Serbian philology until the 1918, and in Croatian very rarely, with few exceptions among philologists of Serbo-Croatian orientation, while among authors, historians, journalists, scientists, most linguists and various other cultural figures, never. We will later come back to the languages' names. Now, let's go to the third criterion. To have a polycentric language you have to have the same literary corpus, at least at the beginning and for most of written history. German and Dutch have common texts from the beginning, for example in the 12th and 13th centuries, but this is a negligible part of their common corpus. In the case of Croatian, Serbian and Bosnian, the common could be the Charter of Kulin Ban from 1189 and a smaller number of short texts from the Cyrillic Raguzin office mentioned by the Croatian linguist Mario Grčević, from the 13th to the 15th century, which is again a negligible part of the total corpus. Together they could be not only part of the texts from the Raguzin office, but also part of the charters and letters of the old Bosnian state, and after its collapse, part of the correspondence of Ottoman local rulers and military commanders with the Raguzin officials and some Christian military commanders from the 15th to the 18th century. This part of the Cyrillic material has not yet been systematically studied and scholarly analyzed adequately, and the smaller part, which is solidly described and published, is often incorrectly attributed due to confusion about the name of the language, as noted by linguist Grčević, as well as the misconceptions of the early Slavic studies. By inertia, Croatian philologists often accepted the attribution that most of these letters and charters were attributed as supposedly Serbian, and because of their focus on far more extensive Glagolitic and Latin Croatian literacy, they neglected and failed to adequately analyze and describe this small but important part of Croatian written culture. Quantitatively, it is less than 1 per mil of Croatian pre-Renaissance written culture, although it is not insignificant for the study of historical changes in morphology and graphematics. This is only recently, but slowly and insufficiently, beginning to be rectified. In the case of English, there is a huge common corpus of American and British English, Beowulf, Piers Plowman, texts from Chancery, Chaucer, Shakespeare, Locke, Gibbon, Hume, Byron, Dickens, Melville, Keats, Whitman, Lawrence, Faulkner. In the case of Serbian, Saint Sava, Dušan's Code, Stefan Lazarević, Dositej Obradović, Vuk Karadžić, and Croatian, Baška Tablet, Hrvoje Missal, Vatican Croatian Prayer Book, Ivan Gundulić, Ivan Mađurinić. You have two language corpora that do not intersect or mix. They differ by almost 100%, which is not the case with the British and American variants of the English language. There is no commonality in communication between Croatian and Serbian until recently. Not in fiction, not in dictionaries, not in schooling. As the Serbian language does not include Bartol Karšić, Ivan Belostanac, Ivan Mađurinić, Ante Kovačić, Miroslav Krleža. According to the same principle, the Croatian core does not include Lazar Lazarević, Lazar Kostić, Stojan Novaković, Miloš Crnijanski. Here, the American and British versions of the English language receive a positive mark according to the third criterion, while Croatian and Serbian receive a negative mark. For Hindi and Urdu there are several common names in the pre-standard period among notable speakers, and several names, Hindavi, Hindustani, Karibali among Indian Muslim and Hindu authors, but these writings are still not possible with certainty, unlike Croatian and Serbian, to subsequently inscribe in the literary corpus of either Hindi or Urdu, except in writing. And we will put a question mark there since Urdu and Hindi older written corpus is not undoubtedly clearly canonized by the prescriptions of Western or European philology. Fourth, to have a polycentric language, you must have the same linguistic cultural community of speakers who not only understand other groups, but form a cultural historical unity with them. Croatian speakers do not belong to the same ethnic, cultural and historical language community as Serbs and Bosniaks. Neither Serbs nor Bosniaks do with others. Let us remember the division of the Roman Empire in the 4th century, the church schism in the 11th century, and the fact that Serbs and Croats on both sides of the river Drina never lived in a common state before 1918, and there were no major cultural contacts until the 19th century. Therefore, Croatian and Serbian receive a negative mark for this criterion.
On the other hand, if we know the cultural history of the United States and Great Britain, we can give their language a positive mark for this criterion. It would be similar for the German language in Austria and Germany, for which there is a legacy of living together in the Holy Roman Empire and due to the common Luther translation of the Bible. The Bible in German is part of the Catholic and Protestant common literary-linguistic history. Among the Slovenes, Primož Trubar, who recognized the uniqueness of the Croatian language, translated the Bible into Slovene in the 16th century, and that became the basis of the Slovene literary language.
The father of Croatian philology, Bartol Karšić, had begun translating the New Testament into Croatian in the Shtokavian language of Ragusan variety in 1625, and at the age of 1626 he was ordered to translate the entire Bible. In 1636, the complete translation was submitted to Rome for approval, but difficulties arose because one ideological group was against the translation into the vernacular. Finally, translation was forbidden, non est expediens ut imprimatio. Given the fact that translations of the Holy Scriptures into the vernacular in many nations played a crucial role in directing linguistic standardization, the ban on Karšić's translation of the Bible caused great damage to the later development of the Croatian literary language. According to the preserved manuscripts and with detailed expert comments, this translation was published in 2000. We can consider the following figures: the most prominent English translation of the Bible, the King James Version, or the Authorized Version, which strongly influenced the form of the English language, was published in 1611, just 2 decades before Karšić's translation. This treasury of the English language has 12,143 different words. Originally, the Bible has 8,674 different Hebrew words, and 5,623 Greek words. However, Karšić's translation, which has not been preserved in its entirety because parts of the Old Testament are missing, numbers about 20,000 different words, which is more than the English Authorized Version, as well as the original. All this shows us the linguistic inventiveness and creative exuberance of the father of Croatian linguistics. Karšić's most published work is the Roman Ritual, which was used in various editions until the 19th century in all Croatian dioceses and archdioceses except Zagreb, and since then it has remained the official liturgical book until the 1929. Thus, this first translation of rituals into one living language certainly strongly contributed to the affirmation of the Croatian literary language.
During the discussion in 1987, Professor Vladimir Horvat handed Karšić's Roman Ritual to Serbian linguist Miroslav Pantić, and Pantić replied, "Well, that is actually today's Croatian literary language. So what did you Croats get from Vuk Karadžić then?" Horvat replied, "Thank you, Croats did not receive anything from Vuk." But in 1987 I proved that Vuk wrote his Serbian dictionary with the help of Croatian dictionaries lent to him by Jernej Kopitar. Kopitar received those dictionaries from the Bishop of Zagreb Maximilian Vrhovec.
Let's look at Hindi and Urdu languages. Hindi and Urdu, as standard languages, are practically the same at the genetic and typological level, but completely different at the cultural identity level. The difference at the cultural identity level is determined by religion, and especially by the criteria of different traditions in written culture and literature. As for the literary tradition, Urdu is more based on Islamic and Persian literary traditions, and Hindi on Sanskrit and Hindu literary traditions. Given these great differences in cultural identity community, here Hindi and Urdu receive a negative mark regarding their identity. Fifth, in order to have a polycentric language, language must essentially be standardized in the same place and at the same time. An extensive literary corpus of the future Croatian standard language appeared in the 16th century, Faust Vrancic's dictionary was printed in 1595, and systematic standardization began with Bartol Karszycz's grammar from 1604, Karszycz's Roman ritual from 1640, Yakov Michalia's dictionary from 1649, and, implicitly, with religious texts from Bosnia, Ragusa and southern Croatia, for example Matija Divković, as well as various lectionaries and evangels from Dalmatia. In the 18th century, the corpus of the written word expanded and covered the entire northern Croatian territory, including Slavonia, and the so-called Circle of Buda Franciscans in Bačka and southern Hungary, with the permeation and influence on the 3 northwestern Croatian counties, and completed in the 19th century. In 1830, Ludovic Gari, in his work A Brief Basis of Croatian Slavonian Spelling, founded modern Croatian script, the only addition being one letter in the script adjusted by Đuro Daničić in 1892.
In 1832, Karacavian Ivan Đurković published his work on Latin language The Spirit of the Fatherland over his sleeping sons, which made an effort to choose Shtokavian dialect for the basis for modern Croatian standard language, since Karacavians in North Croatia and Cherkavians and Shtokavians in other parts of Croatia are united by mystic love. This love was since religious books from Dalmatia were brought to Karacavian parts of Croatia and stylized on Karacavian dialect, as was later discovered by Croatian philologist Vatrislav Yargić.
Croats in Dubrovnik were also for the Shtokavian dialect as a foundation for Croatian modern standard. Let us enumerate some works: Bartol Karšić Grammar of Illyrian Language from 1604, Yakov Michalia Treasure of the Slovene Language 1649, Juraj Habdelić Dictionary 1670, Ardelio della Bella Dictionary 1728, Ivan Belostanets Dictionary 1740, Joachim Stulai Word Formation 1805, Ivan Marjurinic and Yakov Uzharovich German Illyrian Dictionary 1842, Bogoslav Shulek Dictionary of Scientific Terminology 1875, Tomislav Maritic History of Croatian Orthography in Latin Script 1889, Ivan Broz Croatian Orthography 1892, Tomislav Maritic Grammar and Stylistics of the Croatian or Serbian Literary Language 1899, Tomislav Maritic Grammar of the Croatian Language 1901. The Serbian language began standardization in the 18th century with the works of Avramović, Alexei Veselić and Obradović, and ended in the 19th century with the writings of Vuk Karadžić and Đuro Daničić, the process being described by the Serbian philologist Pavel Jović in Review of the History of the Serbian Language. According to this criterion, Croatian and Serbian receive a negative mark on the issue of standardization. We can give a positive mark to the English language.
The Indo-Pakistani pre-standard language based on the Karibali dialect began to be standardized in the Delhi Sultanate, a process that lasted in the Mughal Empire and British India, and the names for that language were Hindi, Hindustani, Hindavi. This language became the lingua franca for almost all of India. In that language, which is a more umbrella terminological name encompassing modern Urdu and Hindi, standardization in the 18th century for the Urdu language ended. Then the Hindi language in that tradition was standardized in the 19th century, so according to this criterion for the identity of these two languages, Urdu and Hindi receive a negative mark.
So, 4 of the 5 criteria indicate that Croatian and Serbian are different languages, not variants of one language.
We can recommend this book in English which deals with Croatian language, and includes one article which deals with relations of Croatian with Serbian language. It is published by Croatian Studies Foundation and the Croatian Heritage Foundation, Folia Croatica Canadiana, Vinko Grubišić, Department of Germanic and Slavic Languages and Literatures, University of Waterloo, Ontario, Canada. English language books on Croatian language and Serbian language, not elementary primers, but surveys of their historical developments, are rather sparse. For Croatian, you have the 6-volume set, A History of Croatian Language, in Croatian, but with English summaries. Also, there are works authored by Milan Moguš, A History of the Croatian Language, Toward Common Standard, Miro Kacic, Croatian and Serbian Delusions and Distortions, as well as Croatian Academy of Sciences and Arts. Edition, Croatia and Europe. So far 3 volumes have appeared in English translation: Croatia in the Early Middle Ages, Croatia in the Late Middle Ages and the Renaissance, Croatia in the Baroque period and the Age of Enlightenment. Serbian language history is presented in the following Book of Serbian Cultural Heritage, The History of Serbian Culture.
Let's conclude this video. One of the most respected Croatian linguists and intellectuals, Radoslav Kartičić, observed that in 1991 over 80% of Muslims in Bosnia stated that their language was Bosnian, in a situation when they knew that their government would like them to choose Serbo-Croatian as their language, and for Kartičić this is the clear evidence that their language exists. But for Croats, the acceptable name for the language of Bosniaks is Bosniak language, since this language is not shared by Croats and Serbs in Bosnia, as would the name Bosnian have implicitly implied, due to the fact that name Bosnia is often used as the shorter name for some parts or for the whole Bosnia and Herzegovina. Bosniaks, at least in some cases, call their literature Bosniak literature. Yugoslav nationalists such as Snježana Kordić state that Serbian, Croatian, Bosnian and Montenegrin is the same language, and that name for that language should be Serbo-Croatian, while some Yugoslav nationalists and ideological Serbo-Croatists prefer the name Naški, which means ours in English. If we would assume that Serbo-Croatian language exists, then the first grammar of that supposedly existing language would be Bartol Karšić's grammar. But since he was a Catholic, Jesuit and Charkavian, that would be something not a single Serb could accept, as Radoslav Kartičić stated, for this issue for Serbs is beyond politics and implies they are essentially a partial heirs to the Croatian language cultural tradition, which is emotionally completely unacceptable. Also, Karšić had written in language that Serbs can nowadays understand, as compared to the older Serbian literature. Because this fact is something both incontrovertible and unimaginable for the Serbian cultural identity, as we have also stated, Karšić's role as the first and central figure for all Shtokavian-based languages' linguistic description must be dismissed, forgotten or marginalized, and Vuk Karadzić's position uncritically elevated. So, for Serbian ideologues and cultural community, Croatian, Bosnian and Montenegrin must not exist, all who speak Shtokavian must be ethnically Serbs, and that would exclude only Croats who speak Charkavian and Kakavian. Otherwise, the entire Serbian self-image would undergo cultural identity crisis, because, to put it extremely, Serbian language is just a late and simplified offshoot of the Croatian language. Of course, such a position would cause the entire edifice of the greater Serbian ideology to collapse. This modern Neo-Shtokavian-based languages are generally mutually intelligible because they are founded upon similar, although slightly different Neo-Shtokavian dialects, with common elementary vocabulary and grammar. But in the case of Croatian, its Western Neo-Shtokavian axis constantly interferes with other Croatian dialects, namely Charkavian and Karakavian, while in the case of Serbian, its Eastern Shtokavian basis is under the influence of the Torlak dialect. Moreover, Croatian and Serbian are still intelligible due to many factors, one of them the Serbo-Croatian language policy, which had been, more than 70 years, bringing artificially those languages closer, with the intent of fusing them finally into one language. But this policy of Serbo-Croatism, as German Slavicist Leopold Auberger has called it, failed because of the strong individuality and ethnic cultural identities of both languages. The mutual intelligibility argument fails because of both reductionism and impossibility of quantification. A language is more than understanding of the other similar languages interlocutors speaking, since individuality of a language is presented in all functional styles, administrative, scientific, publicistic and literary, as well as in grammatical features from morphology to syntax and more, and especially scientific, technical, religious and civilizational terminology. Mutual intelligibility is not an either-or characteristic and it varies over time, and in the case of Croatian and Serbian languages it is generally limited mostly to the area of everyday, colloquial speech, and it decreases with the levels of specialization and intellectualization of the vocabulary, especially in the cases where Croatian follows its fundamental characteristic, purism, which prefers Croatian Slavic-rooted neologisms over Latin-derived internationalist vocabulary in all areas of culture and civilization. Also, intelligibility varies over the period of time and education, even during a lifetime of an individual, and is not strictly quantifiable. Having that in mind, we will transform this green mark with the orange mark to indicate this state of play, especially since small differences in languages are more dangerous than the large differences.
To understand what Karakavian, Shtokavian and Cherkavian mean to the Croatian language, it is best to think about Greek trinity of Ionic, Doric and Attic, where history was written in Younger Ionic and also European literature, Herodotus works being written in Ionic, choral lyric poetry written in Doric, and tragedy in Attic. In the end, with Alexander the Great, Attic began to dominate the Greek language, and also the Greek translation of the New Testament in Bible. Every one of these Greek dialects has great influence and value, comparable to the Croatian literature in all dialects. For example, this two Karakavian and Cherkavian masterpieces written in the 20th century. Croatian dialectal trinity is therefore more similar to Greek dialectal trinity, in comparison to dialect systems in other European languages. The difference in comparison with Greek trinity is that parts of the Croatian trinity are not related to some specific literary genres.
What most ordinary people, and even, rather surprisingly, linguists fail to comprehend is the following. A language can be studied as a system of dialects and as a standard language. These are two different things. Croatian, Serbian, Bosnian and Montenegrin differ as systems of dialects, as has been shown elsewhere. The point is that they evidently differ also as standard languages. While they are all based on varieties of Neo-Shtokavian, and we have seen, these are close, but different variants of Neo-Shtokavian, either Western or Eastern derived, which is reflected in phonology, morphology, vocabulary and syntax. This basis doesn't describe any of these languages as the codified structure. This is a dialectal basis, or close basis, comprising elementary grammar and vocabulary. So, for Neo-Shtokavian-based languages the foundation, which gives the elementary morphosyntactic basis and vocabulary, is almost the same or very similar. But the superstructure of codified morphology, syntax, lexicon, word formation, phraseology, stylistics and semantics evidently differs, due to various cultural histories and ethnically based dialectal interferences which resulted in separate, individualized literary and standard languages.
Standard languages may be compared to houses built upon similar, or even completely the same type of basis, which, by the way, is not the case. One of the two or three houses may be one flawed, other two flawed, third one flawed with the attic, etc. There three, or any other number of houses, may have 6, 10 or 16 windows, different colors, different types of architectural solutions and different numbers or rooms, bathrooms, kitchens, etc. Since one picture is worth 1,000 words, we shall show 2 Christian cathedrals built on virtually the same areas, 5,000 square meters. One is located in England and is Anglo-Catholic, the other is in Romania, and belongs to the Romanian Orthodox Church. The English Cathedral, or Cathedral Church of the Blessed Virgin Mary of Lincoln is this, while Romanian People's Salvation Cathedral is this. The foundation, if we measure it, is virtually of the same quadrature, yet the superstructures of buildings differ evidently.
So, while the Neo-Stokovian basis may be fundamental for understanding of these languages and their mutual intelligibility, it is simply just a segment. Standard language is superstructure, and dialectal basis is a foundation, or in these cases, very similar foundations. And superstructures have a very visible individualities and identities, which includes different names for Serbian and Croatian, different written corpora, and different standardization histories. Based on our criteria, Hindi and Urdu are also different languages, and American and English languages are the same language based on all criteria. This was the first video regarding Croatian and Serbian language in English, which shows basic theory and arguments for our topic. We will prepare at least one more video as a supplement to previously told arguments and theory. Thanks for watching. Be sure to indicate your comments in the comment section, proposals or critics, which would enable us to improve our content on this issue. This video is dedicated to Ivan Durkos.